Okay, hi everyone. Welcome. If it's your first time joining us, thank you so much for being here. And of course, everyone else, welcome back. Let us know where you're coming from in the chat. I'm Ana Brazeitite. I'm the Education Director at Cristina T. Miller Sustainable Jewelry Consulting, where we provide strategy, guidance, and education on responsible sourcing and sustainability for the jewelry industry. If you'd like to find out more, you can check out our website. We'll drop the link in the chat. This is the living room. It's an informal virtual hangout to support community and connection on issues related to responsible sourcing in jewelry. We cover different topics every month, and we love to hear from all of you. You can feel free to share any feedback on what topics you'd like to discuss. We'll drop a form for feedback in the chat as well. I want to say a thank you to everyone who was able to contribute with the pay what you want option. We're so happy to be able to provide these sessions for you, and want to say thank you for helping us make that possible. A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording this session, so these videos will be in the public realm. You are more than welcome to speak up, ask questions and put them in the chat, but when you're not speaking, please stay muted. If you're private messaging, keep it kind as always. And let's be respectful of participants' privacy and personal space. If you want to ask a question or have a comment you want to share, you're free to use the chat at any point. As we're speaking with our guests today, we'll make sure to relay any clarifying questions you may have in the moment, and we will save other questions for a Q&A session in the last half hour. Lastly, if you're not already, please subscribe to our email list to stay up to date. We'll drop a link in the chat for that as well. Our next living room session will be on April 15th. Again, that is the third Friday of the month. And now I will hand it over to Cristina to introduce our guest today.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Nikki. Welcome, Cristina. Right off the bat, before we get into the introductions, we want to let you know that while there's been a lot of questions about gold and diamonds from Russia, and everyone has been asking, aren't you going to talk about that today? We're actually not going to be talking about that today, unless we get through our material and it becomes a really important thing to discuss. But we have spent some time developing good questions, reaching out to Nikki and Cristina for this over a period of time. And so we are honoring the work that they've been doing in their careers, the work that they did to prepare for this conversation. And so we'll save that elephant for another day, but continue to look for communications from us about that particular topic. So Nikki Duncan give a wave so everybody can see you. Good. Nikki is the Technical Director, Chief of Party on the USAID funded Zahabu Safi Clean Gold Project. Welcome. And Cristina Villegas is here with us as the Director of Responsible Sourcing and Minerals at Pact. So both Nikki and Cristina work for pretty large non-governmental organizations, or who also receive government money to kind of do the kinds of projects that they work on. And this particular session is one where we have a variety of questions to ask Cristina and Nikki. And you are welcome, as Anna was sharing, to drop your questions into the chat, but we will kind of get through some of the material we want to make sure we tease out from their body of knowledge and their experiences for all of you before we get into some of those specifics. So the way that this will work for Cristina and Nikki is we'll name you directly, if there's a particular question that's for one or the other of you. And then we'll just kind of facilitate our way around And if there's something that we feel like might need a little bit of clarification, we'll interrupt you. So Anna and I will kind of go back and forth on this a little bit. We have Cecilia Echeverry with us on our team too, who can help you with the chat and any of those kinds of things. So why don't you give us kind of an intro? I'm going to start with Nikki and give us kind of a general description of the type of work that you do, where you're doing it, and how you would describe the challenges that you're trying to help address or improve.
Cristina, thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share and to share the stage with Cristina, whose work I admire. I'm Nikki Duncan, as you mentioned. I work for Global Communities, which is an international nonprofit. We're based just north of Washington, D.C., about 20 minutes north. I lead a project that we're implementing in Democratic Republic of Congo. It's one of two programs now that Global Communities has in the country, and both programs are working in the artisanal and small-scale mining space, so ASM just for short. The project that I manage, as you mentioned, is the USAID Clean Gold Project, Zahabu Safi, as we call it locally. And really, it's a trade facilitation program, if I were to kind of drill it down to two words, where it's an economic growth program financed by USAID, but implemented really in partnership with them. It's a cooperative agreement, which in development terms, particularly for USAID, means that USAID has quite a bit of influence in how the program is designed and managed versus a contract where they just say, here, you guys do it, and we'll just hope you do well. So USAID is really a partner to us in the implementation. We're working with 11 Sources, who I think is no stranger to this group in the implementation. And we're really effectively trying to link artisanal miners, specifically in gold, to international markets through responsible channels. In terms of the challenges that we face, they're probably a myriad, and those who are familiar with artisanal mining, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with just the myriad of kind of health and education and social cohesion, economic opportunity challenges that face that community, whether we're talking about Democratic Republic of Congo or other countries, but in DRC in particular, and the eastern part of the country, which is heavily conflict affected, there is this hypothesis, and I would say, I wouldn't go so far to say that USAID hasn't had this, that people are choosing to mine artisanally because it's a poverty alleviation activity. People do it because they may not have a variety of other opportunities to make money. I mean, we can probably debate that in another stage because what we've heard and found is that artisanal mining is relatively lucrative compared to other livelihoods in that part of the country. So people choose it because it actually gives them more returns on their labor. But with that said, it's dangerous, as we know, if not done correctly. And it has a large impact on the environment. I think any mining is, I mean, it's extractive by nature, so it will impact the environment. And so the challenges we face are not only just with that community itself and the fact that maybe the majority of people are doing it because they're poor, so there's a poverty element, but also, given that we're working in Congo, which has been conflict affected for decades, suffers from weak government institutions, arguably from a long legacy of colonialism and authoritarian rule. So you're operating in a weak state in very impoverished conditions and with people who are very, very vulnerable. So I think in simplest terms, when you're working with the most vulnerable in any economy, you're not just working on that particular activity. There's a myriad of activities or opportunities to help them in their vulnerability and reducing their vulnerability and improving their resilience that you can easily get drawn into. So I'll stop there, but I think that's a bit of an introduction. Oh, where we're working in the eastern part of the country. We're working in 3 provinces: Ituri province, South Kivu, and Maniema, if any of those provinces are familiar to anyone who knows Congo.
Thanks so much for giving us kind of the basic overview. And Cristina, I know that the projects you work on, your Pact is in many different countries at the same time working on ASM. So if you wanted to, highlight 1 or 2, right, particular to, either gold or gemstones. So again, where you're working, the nature of the work, and what are the particular challenges?
Yeah, this could be as we could talk all day about this, but I'll keep it to a couple locations. So Pact, we're a large international nonprofit, and we do a lot of work in ASM in about 13 countries right now. And we work on gemstones, gold, cobalt, copper, sand, coal, lots of different things. But for jewelry, we do a lot of work in gold and gems, and possibly something else on the horizon. Watch that space. I'll talk about Tanzania. That's where most of our work in gemstones is, as one of the major gem producing countries. We also do work in Kenya. And on the gold front, we do a lot of work in West Africa. And in gold, we do a lot of work on reducing mercury use with miners who maybe don't know it'll kill them, or it'll at very least maim them, and perhaps affect their children. There's intergenerational IQ loss when you process gold, and the fumes go directly to your lung and your brain. And a lot of people don't know this. And guess where the women are? The women are the ones burning it. So there's lots of different ways that Pact plays a role. As you all know, the most external facing thing that I do is I'm a GEMS program. And so we work with both private sector and occasionally philanthropic donors, and USAID funders and US Department of Labor funders. But most of our work in GEMS is private funded. So this means groups like GIA, the Gemological Institute of America, will see a problem and they'll come to us and say, we know that you work with miners. How can we actually make this meaningful? Is this a good idea, first of all? Please tell us. And then second, how can we make this meaningful and how can we measure it? And then we'll kind of package that with other initiatives that are happening, maybe in the same area, to really leverage other opportunities to bring more resources to certain areas instead of like something small here, something small there. We'll kind of package it up. And then I might turn around and approach someone else saying, hey, we've heard a lot from these communities. This is what they're saying. And so I think one thing that Cristina wanted me to kind of highlight today is how we're really listening to communities. And that's really a part of all our work. And I can talk about that in the kind of a life cycle of the project, like different hearing points and feedback loops we're getting. But one thing I really want to highlight today is a really cool trend, which is associations of miners who were there before us. They're strengthening themselves through help from Pact and others. That's like really the future, I think, of development, is working with these associations who've come together because they're all experiencing something very similar. They're local leaders. Sometimes there might be associations in name only, so you have to be careful about that. People saying, oh, I speak for everyone, when they really don't. So being careful about who you're partnering with. But I really want to kind of highlight their role today, and how I think we should all be working with them more to get more done, and also to honor local leadership and make that community development link even tighter.
Thanks for mentioning that. We're going to get into more detail about what development looks like today and kind of how it's changed over time. I'm hoping, what we're going to go kind of general, and we're going to work our way to some more and more specific questions. And since I've been working on responsible jewelry issues, the way we've understood the intersection between the jewelry industry and international development has changed. It has gone very much from, oh, we have this problem, let's throw a bunch of philanthropic aid in the direction of the particular challenge or the particular region that we're seeing. And that has shifted to, very much like what we're seeing with Zahabu Safi, or what we've, are seeing with Moyo Gems, where it is a practice of co-participation, involvement, having the conversations that are necessary so that all parties are understanding each other. And so I'm going to go to Nikki, and I'm hoping that you might explain a little bit more kind of from a strategy level of why in particular have artisanal and small scale mining communities been identified as a way to raise up national development strategies, national income revenues. And then, how is it working? Is it accurate to say that poverty is something that can be addressed through ASM, employment, women's rights, health, et cetera? And Cristina, will come to you with the same question.
Thank you, Cristina. This is a huge question, so I'll do my best to to chew the elephant in pieces. Very much similar to Pact. Global communities, we're working in over 35 countries around the world, and artisanal mining is not our expertise, actually. Pact, I think, is very well known in the space, and like Cristina mentioned, has been working in ASM in 13 countries. This is our first time actually working in artisanal small scale mining. But I believe that we were selected because we have a 60-year history of working at the community level with and through communities. Global Communities is formerly known as CHF International, Cooperative Housing Foundation International, which started out working with housing cooperatives. We started to work with cooperatives to help them become more sustainable businesses, inclusive, democratic businesses. And that expanded from a domestic space in the US all the way into, globally. And then we diversified from cooperative strengthening and development to working in health and education and access to finance and humanitarian assistance and so forth. So one of the reasons why I believe that artisanal and small scale mining, from the 4 years I've been working on this program, so by no means an expert, can have an impact in activities geared towards supporting ASM, can have an impact nationally. I just will speak from my experience in DRC, is that if we look at the eastern part of the country, which has been the most conflict affected and still experiences conflict, and arguably, a very impoverished part of the country, 80% of people in Eastern DRC work in artisanal small scale mining. It's 80%, right? So if you're thinking about how to have impact on just the population, it's hard to just avoid this sector. We also know that gold is by far one of the minerals where artisanal mining as a practice is used, where it's mined artisanally. So if you're thinking about minerals specifically, it's hard to kind of avoid gold from an artisanal standpoint, that artisanal, the mechanism for mining. And then if we think about DRC and as a resource-rich country, a good portion of it, it's in under conflict, where 80% of the population is working in this one particular sector. You can start to see very quickly how maybe working on artisanal small scale mining in that part of the country, how it can have impact, how improving the sector, formalizing the sector will now be able to contribute to government revenue capture. For example, just to name one important reason why, artisanal and small scale mining formalization and legalization is impactful. So if we think about, the DRC had, historic elections a few years ago, very new government, relatively weak institutions. How are they going to support their development agenda if they have no money? And we run into that challenge all the time. The government, are so critical to facilitating trade in any country. But if they don't have any money to actually put their governance vision, which is a good one in DRC, their laws and policies are very clear, into practice, then how do you expect to really see the benefits that we're seeking on even just a program at a micro level that we're implementing? So, I mean, the scale at which, artisanal and small scale mining, by having a positive impact, can have an impact just on not only the micro economy of those communities, but those provinces, but also macro impact on DRC government, because, being able to have a tax base through which you can actually deliver social programs, infrastructure, schools, health facilities, basic needs, water. You'll be surprised going into some of these communities how much of all of what I just mentioned is lacking. So I think that in and of itself, to me, is just very evident working in these communities. And just to answer your second question, I am increasingly I have been thinking more about how artisanal and small scale mining can be a launch pad for larger sort of social development, economic development in a place like Congo, for the reasons I just mentioned. The miners are working in such critical, vulnerable state. And, you think about an issue like child labor, which, I mean, it's really, to me, it's somewhat obvious, but it's worth saying, we don't see the prevalence of child labor because these parents are bad parents, they're poor. If there's no school in the village, what are the kids gonna do? So if there are no teachers, some nice mining company might build a school, but then you don't have any teachers. I mean, they're just, the layers of issues just are compounded. And so I think, artisanal and small scale mining communities really present an opportunity to have a much larger development impact, especially in a place like Congo, but arguably, I think anywhere, than I think meets the eye on its face. So I'll stop there. I hope I answered your second question, but.
No, you opened up a whole bunch of topics that I think are really important for people to think about. We'll get to it maybe a little later, but the movement, just to make a comment, you don't have to answer it now, and maybe Cristina has something to say about this too, but the movement towards supporting more ASM versus the shift to really encouraging large scale developments, which would require investment from multinational companies with headquarters, in London or Canada.
Right. I would say, well, it's not either or, right? I mean, we're not going to tell them to keep that money, right? It does go to some good. Global Community is actually working on a second program in DRC in Otweli province, right, in collaboration with Kibali Gold Mines, which is, the largest gold producer in the country. It is through a partnership with USAID and African Parks, and it's Kibali is generating, $2 million a year in social investment that USAID is then thus leveraging, right? So I think that, that big money that comes from mining and maybe mining social investment, it can have an impact, because when you go to Kibali and you fly there, nice roads, great Wi-Fi, health facilities, you feel like you're in South Africa. I mean, I'll just leave it there. So, will that community benefit from that anchor institution sort of crowding in that investment? Of course it will. So I don't want to say that's like big, bad, and evil. But From an inclusivity standpoint, outside of Otueli, the rest of the places where we work do look nothing like that, right? So there is a shift from, I think, a development standpoint, from those who finance development and want to have broad-based, sustainable, inclusive development, realize that, yes, while there's potentially a trickle-down effect, a concentric circles effect of sort of that big mining social investment that comes, that's great, but it often just sits in that particular community. It doesn't go much further. But when you have, when you think about inclusive economic growth, it's hard not to think about artisanal and small scale mining in a place like Congo, for example, because of how many people are impacted by that livelihood. So I think the shift signals an attempt to focus more on community level, broad-based, community-led, I should say, broad-based economic growth. When we think of the private sector, sometimes we think of the multinationals, but the cooperatives in Congo, for example, they're the private sector. So this shift also about empowering local private sector actors, maybe at the micro level, small and medium-sized enterprises. We know here in the US, as you know, small businesses are generating, what, I don't know, 90% of the employment. It goes to, I think, that same rationale, I think, applies to a lot of other countries as well, where when you're focusing on, job creation and inclusive growth, there will be a shift to who your target partners are. So with that.
Yeah, it's really helpful. So Cristina, I don't know what area of that you would like to expand on, or if you have had a different experience, but go for it. Let's hear a little bit about the role of small scale and artisanal mining in development, at a country level.
Mhm.
And, also some of the issues you see being possible to address by supporting, in a way, the economic development of mining groups.
That's exactly what I want to talk about. So yeah, first I'll give you some facts about ASM to kind of talk about why we like to focus in this area, both for the social but also economic reasons. And then we'll talk about the private sector, because I think that's the way forward. So ASM, in terms of labor, is the mining sector. It is 42 million people across 80 countries, almost every continent except Antarctica, who are working every day. And you've all heard me say this before, but I think a lot of people, when they hear about artisanal mining, they often imagine like the Blood Diamond movie. And it's scary, it's like conflicted, but actually, yes, though that still exists. But in most cases, these are just rural people trying to make a living. And in terms of who they are, they tend to we see a lot of farmers who are also miners. And so they call them, mining farmers. And so sometimes you'll see people check into our programs and we'll ask their occupation, and they'll put farmer/miner or miner/farmer. We're seeing a lot of people shift from farming into artisanal mining. And it's because the rains are not predictable anymore because of climate change, or because of climate change, agriculture has gotten more risky. And so they're actually using the mining incomes to then fund their farms. But it's a problem, right, for development when people are moving from a sustainable livelihood to an unsustainable livelihood. And there is no such thing as sustainable mining. The quickest way to pick a fight with the conservationists is to call it sustainable mining. It is the exploitation of non-renewable natural resources. And the gold does not come back. So how can we use the money for today to plan for tomorrow? And also, how can we honor people who want to be better, but had the fewest resources. They had the biggest problems, fewest resources. But taking a step back, for every, in terms of economics, for every mining job on site, there are 6 to 7 jobs created, what are called downstream. So in the country that are reliant on that job. So these are like taxi drivers, haulers, bartenders, sex workers, folks like that, processors. So I was in Ghana a few years ago, trying to convince the Ghanaian government to change policy. I was very fancy. I was a guest of the ambassador, and I talked to the Ministry of Mines, and I said, look, you don't just have 1 million miners in Ghana. You actually have about 7 million people, 8 million possibly, who are touched by this ban on gold mining that you just put in. And so that's 8 million people. What's your population? 32 million? That's one in 4 Ghanaians are working in the sector or who are employed by this sector. So let's take a moment to like recognize and appreciate that, how big of a sector that you built. And then let's like think about how to make that better in terms of its social improvement. One thing that we do at Pact in terms of solutions are focus on the private sector. That's you all here. And that is local private sector, local businesses, mining companies, that is international traders, and that's people who use and love the stuff. So jewelry makers and consumers. And so, Nikki mentioned her partnership with, a gold mining company. In many countries around the world, the procurement budgets for mining companies are bigger than the amount of money available from the US government, for example, for these kind of projects. The procurement budget. So like, where do you get your bananas? Where do you get your wheat? That kind of thing. Wouldn't it be interesting if all that stuff was sourced locally? But right now, it's often just trucked in, or they might be buying a few things locally, but does that change the way you think about mining and think about like how you engage with local communities? You have to be careful, like not to cause a famine if you cause prices to go up. But it kind of creates all these possibilities. So we like working with different parts of industry in creative ways. So we won't work with all mining companies because I'm not going to work with a human rights violator. But a lot of mining companies really want to lean in and do the right thing. And with Moyo, we work with artisanal miners to help create economic incentives for them to become formal, to start improving their mining, and to get better markets. And if you all aren't buying the stuff, we don't have a program. So we're using the power of the private sector to really be able to create change locally. And we do that in lots of different ways. So I will stop talking and I know there's lots of things to say here, but I'll pause.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to like listen to your responses and then keep track of what's the next question. I'm just so enthralled already with what y'all are both sharing with us. So thank you so much. So for both of you, again, we wanted to ask what indicators do you and your organizations look for to understand the impacts and to measure the impacts that you're having in the local communities? So any sort of kind of markers or any ways to measure the impact. Maybe let's start with Nikki.
Thanks, Anna. When I was thinking about this question when you shared it with me in advance, because there's so many ways to answer this. Most of the people on this call are not sort of development practitioners, right? So me explaining sort of what a theory of change is and a results framework and all that, it would probably just go over your head and sound like a foreign language. But I just wanted to mention that there is a very rigorous process that most of us who are in this space go through when we're co-creating, or in our case, or responding to donor financed procurements to work in this space, where you do have to propose a theory of change. What are you trying to accomplish? If this happens, then what, right? So there is sort of a development hypothesis, which is a fancy word for theory of change, that is presented. And then you sort of suggest, okay, well, this is what the program will accomplish. You might have like 3 or 4 high level results that you say, as a result of this program, we're going to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D. So most of our programs have what we call a monitoring, evaluation, and learning element to that. So we're spending US government tax dollars, or US taxpayer dollars, right? So the government really does hold us very accountable to making sure that we have a clear sense of what we're doing and how we're monitoring and evaluating and learning, and then maybe pivoting in the case of our program, because we take a market systems development approach, which is a specific development theory that suggests that we facilitate more efficient workings of the market rather than being intervening in the market, which by nature of development programs we do. So we basically take an approach where we try to the least extent possible, actually intervene in the market. So global communities, we are not selling global communities gold. We're not selling Zahabu, Safi gold. We are not buying gold. We are not creating cooperatives, right? We are basically working with the market actors and forces and trying to unlock and block barriers that exist and sort of facilitate more efficient market function. With that said, it really depends. For us on our program, we take a whole of supply chain approach. So it's not just the impact at the community level that we're seeking, right? We're looking at sort of the impact that our program is having across the supply chain, because at the end of the day, our program is specifically designed to be a commercialization program. So a success for us is can it happen? Can gold actually flow through the supply chains that are facilitated by our program? And are they sustained once we leave? We've seen a number of other programs that are similar to ours that have taken maybe a different approach, where given just the difficult nature of working in DRC, they may have had to incubate a cooperative or even create a cooperative and, subsidize them at 100% and, do really insert themselves into the market in a way that we are not, and that's just not global communities sort of way of working. We do not want to take away from local actors and sort of their role in the market, because once these programs end, we disappear, and we would cause more harm than good if we just kind of gave out a whole bunch of subsidies and created cooperatives and passed out a ton of cash, and then the program goes and all of that falls apart. So for us, our impact is sort of measured at different levels in the supply chain. So upstream, we're looking at cooperative strengthening. Have we been able to help a cooperative move from this level of capability or strength related to how it governs itself, its financial management, administration, operations, production, membership management? We do a baseline to see where the cooperative is. In many cases in DRC, they're close to zero. And how have we moved the needle? So we have a tool called the Cooperative Performance Index. It's specific to global communities, and we measure the cooperative using that index at the beginning of our intervention and every 6 months. So and it guides the way that we support cooperatives. So based on their Cooperative Performance Index score in areas related to governance, marketing, management, membership, production, then we have a series of activities, and we call them in development interventions. It's a word I really hate. So a series of sort of strengthening activities And then, we will do a measurement after 6 months to see, did they actually learn anything? Did they improve? Has their ability to capture production improved? Has their ability to trace materials improved, right? So there's a whole package of, has the cooperative as a functioning body, which in DRC is important because you can't be an artisanal miner just kind of willy-nilly. You have to be associated with the cooperative according to the law, the DRC mining law. So cooperatives are our point of intervention or point of departure in Congo specifically. So we really look at cooperatives as businesses and business entities, and we use our specific index to see how have they improved as independent business entities, because ultimately they're going to be responsible for continuing whatever, to sell through the listed channels that we facilitate beyond us being there. Then we're looking at exporters. Measurement of progress with exporters, especially when we're talking about things like continuous improvement in the context of due diligence and traceability, right? Are exporters able to identify all the places from which they're sourcing? Are their business practices aligned with the OECD framework? That's the framework that we use. So we're sort of framework and standard agnostic as a program. So it really depends on the buyer. The buyer and demand will sort of lead. But are exporters able to comply with whatever due diligence framework or standard that is being required from the buyer that we link them to, for example, responsible buyer? So being able, we're able to track, again, baseline, exporter and their current sourcing. Are they able to sort of identify where they are and sort of tracing gold, versus after 6 months, a year, and then so every 6 months, year, and then at the end of the program to be able to see improvement. We have been using due diligence and traceability service providers, Better Chain and RCS Global, who help us with developing corrective action plans for our upstream actors. So those corrective action plans really say, based on a baseline supply chain evaluation with the cooperative and the exporter, for example, upstream, here are the risks that are presented according to OECD, and as a result, here are the actions that need to take place. This is a time frame in which they need to take place, and this is who leads on it. So our corrective action plan is another tool that we use to see how the upstream portion of the supply chain is evolving and improving, so that it aligns with OECD due diligence guidance for responsible sourcing of gold in this case. So with the Cooperative Performance Index and our corrective action plans, we're able to track how the upstream actors are improving the responsible nature of their business. It's important to say that because they're doing business, right? They are doing business. Are they doing it responsibly and legally? That's the question mark, but they are doing business. So they don't need us to do business, right? So it's just being able to track their progress over time. And then finally, we're looking at refiners as well, right? What is it that they need in terms of due diligence information? I think we'll dig into this a little deeper, probably in later questions, but I think due diligence as a concept is really, depending on how we look at it, it can be a facilitator, but it can also be a shackle, especially in the context of Congo and how it's applied. Whenever you as a people are subject to something that you do not contribute to in terms of rules and regulations, to me, I think that is where sort of the colonial elements can reveal themselves. When you have, OECD, right? Who is OECD? Who are they, And who, creating the rules and setting the rules of the game, and then these countries have to just sort of follow it. And if they don't meet that standard, right, it's just like they get shut out of the formal and responsible market. I mean, so anyway, I'll stop there because I'm getting on a soapbox, but looking at then the jewelers, right? What is it they need in terms of what is their demand in terms of price and volume? And again, due diligence information. Sometimes we tend to overinvest in programs on really high quality due diligence, really granular daily monitoring information. And we realize that buyers don't necessarily need that. So we look at, for us, at measures of progress at all nodes of the supply chain. So sorry, that was long-winded, but got me going.
No, thank you so much, Nikki. Looks like from the chat, we do have a few development focused folks here, but the way you explained that was very clear for beginners like myself. So I appreciate that you're giving that answer for everyone here. And Cristina, do you want to add to that as far as Pact goes and impact measurements?
Yeah, I think maybe it'd be helpful for people in the room who, are new to this to kind of understand how we deliver programs. So a group will contact Pact, and I'll talk to them about what their goals are, what they want to achieve, what's important to them, and we'll kind of talk about it. And sometimes they have like big dreams, and I can kind of say, well, this might not be achievable within like a year time. Let's because I know the context. So we'll talk about it. Then we'll agree on it. And then, and I'll have talked to my colleagues. We'll just keep using Tanzania. So I'll talk to my colleagues in Tanzania saying, is this something that you're interested in? Because I can shut this down, or we can put some parameters on it. And so they early in the process say yes or no, because they're the ones who will be implementing it. So they need to have a voice in this. And then we'll get the grant or get the piece of work. And I'm just an advisor, and my colleagues in Tanzania are the ones who actually do the work. We in Tanzania, I think it's an all Tanzanian office right now, maybe one or two foreigners, but we have several hundred people there, all Tanzanians, master's degrees, multiple languages. I think people don't always appreciate how much talent there is everywhere. It's always really that's one of the beauties of travel, is that you really are constantly humbled. And so it is not me who goes out and delivers trainings. This is my colleagues who think about how, level of education, explaining foreign terms like OECD. We don't really explain it. We just kind of talk about what's expected, and and kind of negotiate what can be achieved when. And then we also work with associations who, like TUOMA, who most of you are aware of, the Tanzanian Women Miners Association, and they help us reach these miners and tell us what's going right, and tell us what's going wrong, and tell us when we screwed up. It's a really close relationship built on trust and communication. And I mentioned all those things because there's lots of different moving parts, but also just so you can appreciate, I do not speak fluent Swahili. My colleagues do, and they also know about different ways to approach different groups, and also what I'm not seeing in terms of threats to the program, politics in the area, who needs to be consulted, how should we frame things. And one of the reasons that Pact is often hired to do this work by like the U.S. government, for example, we're not getting any U.S. funding for Moyo. For just to be clear, that's completely private sector funded and foundation funded. But one of the reasons we're often hired is because we work with local associations to help them kind of get their finances in order, get their governance structures in order, so that they can receive funding from like direct funding from the US or other groups. And so that Pact doesn't need to be an intermediary anymore. They can get direct funding. And so one of the success factors for that we're held to account is when they graduate, Pact, like when Pact is no longer the intermediary, that's a success. Now, sometimes they come back to us because something's gone sideways, and or they need to be retrained. But when early on in my career at Pact, I learned that, and I was so impressed that actually the goal is to get them direct funding and not everything go through Pact. So some of the things that we measure are, those kind of financial kind of aspects. Our associations, are they doing advocacy to the government to improve the laws and then get funding from the government to, to actually improve things and get services to these areas? How's the research? Is the research compelling? Are they doing research? Or is it just like talking to a couple friends and then going? On the mine site level, we look at miner incomes as a big indicator whether we're actually making a positive difference. We look at nutrition. So when we walked into to the communities where Moyo is based, a lot of miners were skipping meals because they were so poor that so economically poor, that they were working so hard but choosing to feed their families instead of eating themselves. And if you can just imagine, like, we're in the jewelry sector, we're in like a luxury business, and for the miners to actually have to skip meals to make, to live and feed their families, like, that just like hit me. We don't have that problem anymore with Moyo. Hallelujah, because they're making more money. But that's one thing we watch for. We also watch to see who's coming to the market days that we hold. There was a time where our country director, her name's Mariana, she came to the market day and she's like, "Where are all the women?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" "They're everywhere." "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "I was expecting like 90%. And I was like, "Well, they're like 60%. And she's like, "Well, you should work on that." And I was like really mad. But then I reflected. I was like, she's right. Our numbers have dropped. And we thought about that, and we listened, and we went to go investigate. And the reason the number had dropped is because the ladies had to wake up at 4 a.m. to then catch a bus that doesn't come regularly to go to the market day, which the government had insisted be in this one location. And it's a risk because we don't pay for the market. We don't pay for that bus. And they're away from their families all day long, and they have other responsibilities. So we used those kind of data points, talked to the government, and got permission to hold it into the villages. And guess what? We're at 70% now, which is a personal victory. But looking at the numbers and then being really honest about like what's actually happening, we use those things to informal programming constantly, even if they're inconvenient. And then on the mines, just last point, on the mines, we'll often look at, okay, what are your baseline, the standards up here, making sure we're seeing progress. And sometimes we know when I pull up, everybody runs and put their PPE on. Suddenly, they put the mask on, they put their boots on when I'm there. So I know this little game and I appreciate it. Masks are uncomfortable, but we'll do like surveys like, okay, do you wear a mask? How long? Why? How about other people on your site, or other people in the area? Do they wear masks? And when you talk about other people, they're like, "Oh yeah, no one wears masks." And so there's different, data collections like an art and a science. I can talk about this all day long, tell funny stories all day long, but we keep a very close eye on lots of different aspects of this work, and are constantly trying to figure out, okay, what is the real story here, and how can we really lean in and not have it be a pretense that people are wearing masks? How can we actually get them to wear it when like I'm not there?
Thank you. The indicators of the kinds of things that you look for on the ground, I think, are probably pretty valuable for everyone to hear. I think sometimes at the intersection of these various links in the supply chain, we also have to work to trust each other, to be able to, give trust to the NGOs that are working in the particular space. Is the work they're doing reflective of the values that the jeweler might be bringing to the table to be there? So understanding how each organization is doing that and keeping track of it. both what unique, not necessarily unique, but something that you are both saying is that you're trying to provide the kind of support that will mean the sustainability of the project in terms of economic and long-term longevity after the hosts are gone from the particular site. And that, I think, I'm not sure how that's resonating for the folks that are on the call. I can imagine, at the same time, one of the other things that the industry, the jewelry industry, is sort of being taught to appreciate, which is a little bit opposite to what you're saying, is that look to those sites where NGOs are already providing support. If you're going to get involved in some kind of mine to market project, or you want to support a particular mining community, how does that, I'm off-roading on our questions a little bit, but I wanted to highlight this, like, how does that, is that real? Is that a good way for a jeweler to look for projects to get involved in or to invest in? Or would you tell them to look for other indicators? And Cristina, we'll go to you, and then we'll jump over to Nikki.
Yeah, so the realities are that, funding, like philanthropic funding, is limited. And if anybody here has, some cash and they want to throw it my way, I can, we can make really cool things happen. But I do want to acknowledge that there's 42 million people who are working in the sector across 80 countries, and I wouldn't want to say, oh, don't source there because Pact is not there. So what I've been trying to emphasize to the jewelry community is start with your current supply chains and get information. The country of origin is the bare minimum piece of information that you need. It'll tell you what are the risks that you need to be looking for. So if you're sourcing from Afghanistan, for example, are you funding the Taliban? Are you funding a Taliban-led government? I also would have asked about health and safety risks and the trade routes. Those are all questions I would ask based on Afghanistan. The questions in Tanzania would be very different. It would be health and safety risks, and if it's in the south of Tanzania, terrorism financing potentially, because unfortunately there's some hot spots there. In the north where we are, very few due diligence risks. So in order to kind of meaningfully respond, at the very least, you need a country of origin. And the only way you're going to find that out is either by going to projects like ours, or getting that information from your current suppliers. And so I often tell suppliers who are very mad at me for starting to create new expectations in sourcing. I'm like, well, I'm sure, what are you doing right now? Are you just buying and running, or are you buying and working on something interesting? You should talk about that. Have some proof. I talk about geotags a lot because if they have a picture of something really cool happening and it's supposed to be in Tanzania, but it's like in Bolivia, not Bolivia. Tanzania is supposed to be like in Nigeria. It's a problem because that's like not fact. So I guess I would start in your current supply chain with your current suppliers, because they actually might be doing some of this work already, and then just being so humble they're not telling you about it. Or they might just not realize that they themselves are change makers, and they need to get going and start some of this stuff. During COVID, we saw a lot of action by suppliers who are doing the right thing by doing food drop-offs, by funding miners that were suddenly out of work. If they're doing this stuff, they need to tell you about it, because if they don't talk about it, if they don't write it down, we will all presume they're not doing it. But then also, let's move beyond words. Let's have proof points and honest conversations about okay, yeah, the site's a disaster in terms of health and safety. That's something I've been, you can tell this little story I just told you. People don't want to wear PPE, but we're working on it. But everything else is going well, but this is like our main challenge. So that's my advice, is to start with your current suppliers. If they refuse to change, the beauty of this industry is that there are many suppliers that will eat what you want. And you can choose those who are proving themselves to you. So please buy the products that we're working on, because that's what actually makes these things. We continue our work because you're buying the stuff, and if you don't buy the stuff dies. The program will die. So please buy this product, buy the products that we have, where we've told you about them. But then also look at your current suppliers and also try to push them to do better work too, or communicate better.
Thanks, Christine. Yeah, Nikki, I just wanted to add to you, as you're thinking about the way you respond to this, again, sort of applying that lens of supporting what the people on the ground want. Yeah.
Yeah. You took the words out of my mouth, Cristina. The two Cristinas you gave me. I'm going to agree with Cristina Villegas and respond to Cristina Miller. Hopefully you did as well. I agree with what Cristina says in that you gotta know where your product's coming from. I mean, I will tell you, I had a conversation with a large multinational who said point blank that they couldn't tell you beyond tier 1 who their suppliers were. I was like, come on, guys. In agriculture, I know some of the big multinationals could tell you exactly what community the cocoa is coming from. McCormick can tell you where the vanilla and their vanilla essence is coming from in Madagascar and can have impact in those communities. So we got to do better, period. So if you're just saying, well, they're not telling me, well, don't buy from them. I mean, if you care. If you don't care, then you don't care. So I'll say that. You have choice, you have agency. And I think as a community, especially when we come together, you can create change with your choices. And I'll tell you, your community, your customers, if you don't care, one of your customers is going to ask you, and then you're going to want to know, right? So I think I agree with Cristina. Take the time, doesn't have to be tomorrow. Just start asking a few questions. OECD due diligence guidance, it's great. It's 5 steps. There's other things out there like craft. They're different names, but they all kind of have the same element. You don't have to get too worried about it, but it gives you a sense of what you should be doing in terms of managing the risks in your supply chain. It's yours. It's not mine as global communities. It's yours. So I would encourage you to just start to understand, and there are a number of solutions out there to help with supply chain transparency. So just explore those. I will say, just to answer Cristina Miller and speak to, I would say the project that we have, the advantages, we are helping you with relationships. We're not selling a product. Global communities are not selling a product. We're helping you with relationships. So to help you get that transparency, the advantage of working with projects like ours, or our project, I'll speak for ours in particular, is that you'll know the refiner, you'll know their exporter, you'll know the cooperative, because of the due diligence processes and procedures that we require our participants to adhere to, right? I'm going to kind of make a pitch to say, buy from our project supported suppliers. We're going to go away in 18 months. Our project's going to go away, but it doesn't matter, right? If the project is not what you want to sustain. Global communities, we're going to eat from the US government. We're probably not going to, you guys are probably not going to be able, not financing us directly necessarily. And that's okay. What we want to sustain is the incentive to continue for well-meaning actors to continue to sell to people, hopefully like you, right? We want well-meaning actors to come together, create relationships amongst each other, and continue to sell to each other. Global communities were going to go away. So the call to action from my perspective is really about engaging. If it's easier for you to engage through projects like ours so you can create those relationships, that's exactly what we want, because those relationships are going to sustain themselves beyond the life cycle of our program. It's not about our program, it's about those relationships. So I think the advantage of engaging in these programs is that you will be able to create those relationships all the way down to the pit level. You could probably do that on your own. It would just probably take a little longer, and it'll be harder to figure out who to talk to. And, you may not have that time to sort of do all that research unless you just fly to the sourcing country yourself, which I think would be awesome. But I do think you kind of get a fast track to some relationships through these programs, which I think you can then build on. So I think that's the advantage, but it's really the project supported suppliers and actors that we're encouraging you to create those relationships with, but definitely not, well, I mean, I'd love to be your friend, but you know what I mean? I don't have gold to sell you. So.
If I could just come in on Christina's question about just making sure it's what the communities want. When we created Moyo, Monica Stevenson, who's in this chat, was there. We asked them, ladies, we don't want to promise anything. We sat with the miners and we said, are you interested in this? And they like looked around. They're like, you mean you want to create a system that's like built around us? Yes, of course we want this. And so we're like, okay, let's talk about it. But one thing we asked is, if there's interest in investments here, what would you like? Can you tell us about what would you like for reinvestment priorities? And Monica was there, and so was Stuart Poole. We heard two things. We heard maternity centers, like maternity child health, because they're like, we had to go kilometers and kilometers to get help, and it's not available here. And then the other thing we heard was teacher housing, and I was like, what do you mean teacher housing? And then the teacher grabbed my hand and she's like, let me show you. And so she like took my hand, like walked me over to her house, and where she shares with two other teachers. It's supposed to be one house per teacher that the government builds, but they're all sharing a house. And the ladies, the teacher and the ladies were like, how are we supposed to have better schools if we can't attract good teachers? And to attract good teachers, you need good teacher housing, or at least one house per teacher. So Monica just wrote something in the chat. We can't assume what these communities need. We have to ask. And that's actually how Moyo was formed. At the end of the GIA project, we did an evaluation. We asked what else would make a difference. And they said, predictable markets, better money, predictable markets. We're selling when we're hungry. We're selling when we have to pay school fees. Because school is not free there, by the way. Might be like, it might be technically free, but there's like, you pay the teacher, it pays, books, you have to pay, meals. It's not free. And these are like very economically poor areas. Just like a little truth bomb there as far as like just things that everybody's facing. And so Moyo was formed because they got so much out of the program, but then they also told us what's still not working for them. And then I met Monica and Stuart, and magic was made when we went back to these areas. But just to point out that in the early co-design process, whenever we have like a new opportunity, like with like U.S. government, the best way to respond is then going to those places and talking about it with people and seeing what they would want to see, and then talk about, okay, who would be a spoiler here? Is there anybody who would sabotage this? What do we do about that? How do we guard against that? Because they know, because they live there, and they can tell you who's who. So we do a lot of co-designs, and that's how Moyo was created.
Thanks. Anna, go ahead with that question 8 if you want.
Yeah, okay. So what I kind of, I'm like processing all of this. I'm really appreciating this discussion. And what I kind of want to highlight from processing what we just talked about is that both Nikki and Cristina are kind of highlighting a way of working that really challenges the old and traditional power structures that have been in place, especially in some of these countries that were previously colonized, and just really challenging these previous development strategies that weren't in communication with the local communities, and really just shifting that dynamic. So I just wanted to just really highlight that and appreciate that. And then this kind of also leads me into a question more related to how jewelers take this information in about the continual improvement and the progress that artisanal mining communities are making. There's often this desire for just telling a purely positive story. And as most of us here know, there are complexities to it. It's about supporting that progress and that continual improvement. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to us a little bit about how do we better align our hopes and what we're working towards with the more realistic story, and kind of avoid placing our own, Western, global North, however you want to put it, values upon these communities. Whoever wants to.
I can jump in here. I think I'll say this, but I don't want it to come back and haunt me in the sense that, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? I say that to mean that one of the challenges that I'm seeing with some of the supply chain actors that we're working with, sort of like up to midstream, is the sense of, if it doesn't meet this criteria, like OECD says, after 6 months, we just, we disengage, right? Worst forms of child labor, let's say, for example, it's a very common and relatable issue. No one wants to support a supply chain where the worst forms of child labor are taking place. Like, I think we can all agree on that. But when we think about something, an issue of child labor where we understand and appreciate that it's systemic, it's related to poverty, and there are a variety of other interventions or activities or initiatives needed to work together to reduce that particular type of risk. Then I think there's this idea of going in with the understanding that we're doing something to do something about it. So rather than sort of sitting back and saying, well, I don't want your gold until it looks like this, looks like that, it looks like it ticks all these boxes, and yeah, you can go somewhere else with it. That's the type of stuff that that lends itself to the 90% of gold that's being smuggled out of Congo, because they're going to say, well, screw you, right? We're going to sell it to the people who are giving us more money for it anyway. Thanks, right? So in order to, I think there needs to be this collective acceptance of continuous improvement as sort of a mantra. This idea that we don't engage, or we don't try, or we don't buy because it's not perfect. I think changing that mindset. But what you do is that you actively invest in risk mitigation, right? Because what you're basically trying to, I mean, OECD due diligence guidance, which is what we use, because it's guidance. It's due diligence and responsible sourcing is a risk management strategy. It's a risk management strategy, right? It's not an end, it's a means. So as long as you can put in place a risk management strategy that helps you, one, gives you visibility into your supply chain. So you just need to know where you're getting, where things are coming from. And two, what are the problems associated with how that product is being produced? And three, you have a plan in place to mitigate those issues, those problems. That's what you communicate on. So for me, I think due diligence, embracing due diligence as a way to have an understanding and visibility into where you're sourcing from, and also being a catalyst to help you do something about it. I feel like that is sort of the future. And I would encourage jewelers to think more in that realm. I think we need to challenge, OECD and LBMA, really invite voices in, especially bodies locally, because there are a number of local actors in DRC. They actually have provincial and local level committees that are designed to monitor activities in the mining sector. I mean, it's like, wow, you actually have, like, that's their job. Why wouldn't we just invest in helping them do their job better? Rather than, I'm not negating the value add of some of these due diligence providers and traceability providers out there. I think they're great. But for jewelers like many of you, you may not be able to pay $17,000 or $25,000 a month to get daily mine site monitoring information. I can tell you that's what we paid for those services, right? Does that mean that you don't buy from some of these places because you can't afford for that? No, I think, what these programs like ours can do is really work with you to put that risk management strategy in place. What is responsible sourcing to you? What is responsible to you? It's going to be different for everybody. Some people have certain values that will suggest that, it's really about, no mercury. I cannot have mercury because of this. And then you have a mitigation strategy in place. Some people will feel very strongly about human rights abuses or certain types of it. They're more than, child labor is not the only type, right? There's a lot of other human rights violations going on. So it's just having visibility, but then coming together to try to actually do something about it, rather than sort of sitting back and say, well, until you kind of meet our standards, we'll just go elsewhere. I really don't think that helps. And I think that perpetuates the power dynamics that colonialism and most isms that we know of are fueled by. So I'll pass the book to Cristina.
Thank you, Nikki. Yeah, Cristina, let's have you add what you'd like to add. Yeah, we're coming up close to the end. If there are any pressing audience questions, maybe we'll take one at the end. But yeah, let's have you add to that, Cristina.
Yeah, there's no possible way I can be as eloquent as Nikki just was just now. But it took her at least 5 minutes, 10 minutes to answer that question. And consumers see artisanal mining and they're like, but she's barefoot. What are we doing? What are you encouraging? She's in the dirt. I'm like, what would you wear to mine? if you were to paint your house, what would you wear? If you were to mine, I wouldn't wear this outfit. I mean, please. So yeah, of course they're gonna look like they're, the worst that it could possibly be. And sometimes that can fool people on actually what people are making. I always like to tell a story of a grandmother I found on a mining site, and she was mining away. And she said, yeah, I put my kids through college on this, at university on mining. And I was like, what? She's making a good living, good for her. I tweeted about it. I love tweeting about the stories because if I'm humored, I'm sure other people are humored by it. And just want to hear these things. That's why I really focus on it. And also kind of humanizes the sector. But I mentioned that because, it took someone like Nikki 10 minutes to, not 10 minutes, but like a few minutes to talk about it, but consumers have these instant reactions. And so sometimes I'm in the uncomfortable position of telling people who like buy Moyo gems, I'm like, if I were you, I would focus on the women in their villages, and I would not show the mine sites. Because even if they're wearing PPE, like I've been showing recently, the question I get is, well, where's the masks? Like, oh gosh, don't talk to me about masks. Like, COVID, I guess, has shown us all like how uncomfortable masks are, right? And can you imagine working in the hot sun all day long? It's one of those, so Anna, to your question, this stuff doesn't look very nice. There's so much work behind it. And the fact that those ladies are wearing boots and helmets and reflectors, but people are like focusing on, they don't have masks on. I'm like, that is next. Please work with me here. One thing that I noticed that one of our partners did, because they kept getting some feedback online, is create a whole web page, focus on some of the kind of getting ahead of these questions. Okay, why do we do this? Why is it important to engage artisanals? And they had pictures and like it was really simple language. And even though I think I communicate well, I can get kind of techie. And so they did a really lovely job. And so I tell other folks who also want to tell the Moyo story, you might want to do that because you're going to get these questions and they're really frustrating, but to think about how long it took you to like wrap your head around these issues and how can we expect consumers who've seen this Blood Diamond movie and who see this and are shocked, you can appreciate where they're coming from. But so you should kind of be prepared for that and just kind of create some infrastructure so they can kind of get their questions answered. And then we send them to the Moyo page and hopefully I can also answer some more questions.
That's awesome. Thank you, Cristina. And not to do like a self plug, but I do actually want to mention on that note that there's a couple of folks here who we're together working on an open source project around consumer awareness and communication with consumers about artisanal mining, starting with gold. So hopefully that's something that we can all like kind of work together on, and we'll have some information for other jewelers here to share with their consumers as well. So yeah, we're all kind of working towards this space of being able to communicate about this in a way that consumers can understand the progress and not perfection. But yeah, Cristina, is there anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Well, maybe next month's session should be the same one and we can get to all the questions that were asked in the chat. There's definitely more curiosity in the room of participants than what we are going to have time to get to today. I want to say thanks to Nikki and Cristina for being here, sharing their experience and their knowledge, being so generous too in the chat to answer some of the specific questions. We always do our best to try to incorporate your questions in the way we prepare the takeaways after every living room session. It takes us a couple weeks to pull those off, but we try to answer the questions in more depth there when we can. Some of the big takeaways for me were this reminder, always the reminder to, when possible, hear what the community wants. Do your own due diligence on the organizations that are claiming to work with artisanal mining communities to make sure that they're bringing the voice of those they say they're serving into the fold. Recognize, Nikki just highlighted this amount of money, up to $25,000 a month to receive daily updates on what is happening at the mine site. Just let that sink in a second. So we're creating kind of a collective awareness of the things that are happening at the mine site, thanks to the investment that's being made in projects like Zahabu Safi, right? We're able to kind of get this information. For us to say, I want daily information about what's happening on the mine site, it's probably not quite going to happen that way. So we'll continue to use channels, of sharing information so that, you're increasingly comfortable with this. And on the heels of what Anna from our team just said, there are a number of initiatives, it's true, that are underway trying to create a different understanding of what can be supported by industry when it comes to supporting artisanal and small scale miners in whatever material they happen to be mining, whether that be colored gemstones, diamonds, gold. And in light of that, we're still trying to finesse, what's the tool that's going to help us communicate it most easily to the consumer? Is it craft code? Is it OECD? But we're looking right now for that baseline common denominator that we can create quick messaging around for consumers, so that then under that, then we can start to explain the real roots of the improvements that are occurring, with that support. So as these kind of group thinks continue to occur, we'll keep that in mind. And finally, kind of in light of knowing where your materials come from, it leads us sort of to the thing I said we wouldn't talk about at the top of the hour. But if we're not seeing right now every reason to know where your materials are coming from, now is a moment where it's glaring in the face of everyone, especially if you're sourcing diamonds from Russia, gold from Russia, etc. So there's so much, we have so much more that we'd like to also talk about in light of recent events and news coming out of DRC and so on. So we'll just say thank you for right now. Nikki, we understand you're traveling. You'll be in country shortly, right?
Yeah, Monday.
Yeah.
Happy to keep in touch.
Yeah, exciting. Please do. And Cristina, you seem like you're often on the road in different places. We get to hear some firsthand information from you.
Yeah, follow my Instagram, Cristina.rocks.
Yeah.
I'll put it in the chat.
Excellent. Thanks to everybody. It's always wonderful to see you again, third Friday of every month, and keep an eye out for our takeaways. Thanks. We really appreciate your time and knowledge shared today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting us.
It's a pleasure.
Have a great weekend.
Next session, April 15.
Nikki and